Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Open Mic. It's been a while. It's been more than a year since my last episode, and I need to figure out, and I'm figuring out, I hope, how to make this podcast YouTube channel work. So I'm glad I got here today. I have to say I've been thinking about making another episode ever since my last episode, and obviously that hasn't happened until today. And actually, it's kind of in line with what I've been thinking about lately, which is something I call the action gap. And I want to start off with a few scriptures and a couple scriptures and a quote that I like. So, in Matthew chapter 7, Christ gives a parable about the wise man and the foolish man. Many of us who are Christian are familiar with this parable. And one thing I found interesting about that parable of late is that the difference between the wise man and the foolish man is whether or not they do what Christ has said. He said, "Whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will compare to a wise man." And then later he says, "Those whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not, I will compare to a foolish man." And so it's not that the foolish man never heard the Lord's words. It's just that he never did them. Another parable that's kind of in the same vein is in Matthew chapter 21. And it's perhaps a lesser known parable, but it's one that I really love. It's a certain man with two sons, and he asks them both to go work in his vineyard. And the first son said, "I will not," but repented and went. And the second son said, "I go, sir," and went not. And then Christ poses the questions to the Pharisees, which is to whom he's talking, and he says, "Which of them did the Father's will?" And of course the answer is the first one. Even though he said he wouldn't, he later did anyways. So now I want to read a quote that I recently got. James Clear, one of my favorite authors, he wrote a book called Atomic Habits that I just love to death. But he sends out a newsletter, and this week in his newsletter, he said, "The first minute of action is worth more than a year of perfect planning." And I like that. I found it to be true in my own life. There's nothing quite like just doing, right? Just actually getting down to brass tacks and starting. And you can plan and plan and plan, and you can think and you can ponder, but that's no substitute for actually doing. So kind of my I think you can see where I'm getting at here, but kind of my thought is we all have things that we believe, that we've thought about, that we want to do, that we have been thinking about for months, years, who knows how long. Maybe it hasn't been that long, maybe it's been weeks. But we just haven't done them. You know, maybe we kick them down a road, or we come up with reasons why we can't yet. And to be fair, a lot of those reasons feel very real, you know. And there may be some cases, you know, like an extreme example may be if you want to run a marathon, but you don't have the use of your legs. You know, obviously there are some instances like that, but I would suggest that the majority of the time, the reasons we're coming up with for why we're not doing something really don't have a lot to do with those reasons. So, you know, so we may ask ourselves, you know, why? What prevents us from doing? You know, we have these things that we believe, we have values of being, you know. I know many of us have values of, I need to be more patient, I need to be kinder, I need to be less prone to get angry, I need to do more for my community, for my family, for my friends, and we don't. You know, we think it and we believe it, but that's kind of where the buck stops a lot of the time. And obviously I'm generalizing here. And obviously there are plenty of times where we succeed. But it's just that gap between believing and doing, between knowing and taking action. right? And that's what I mean as the action gap. So ultimately, each of us is the master of our choices. We get the final say in what we will do. And there's other people in our lives who have influence and who are responsible for, or we care about them, we want them to think good of us, these kinds of things. But they don't push the buttons, they don't make the choices. We do. Each of us does. And that's important to take into account. Sometimes we can feel like our life is run by other people, by our boss, by our family, by our friends sometimes. And the truth is that it's not. And it's not run by any other outside forces that are non-human, like our jobs or our habits or whatever. We're the ones who make the choices. And that's very important to believe and to understand. Another thing that I believe is important to understand and that helps to cross that gap is that there is always a solution that will allow us to live according to our values within our other parameters that we have to consider in our life, right? So you work a really busy job. Do you have 2 minutes, 5 minutes during the day to start on whatever it is you've been thinking about starting on? Do you have, you spend most of your time on homework or at school? Do you have time, again, just, maybe 5 minutes to think about what it is you should be working on in terms of your personal life? Take that time. 2 to 5 minutes a day is infinitely better than 0. You can times 0 by infinity and you'll still get 0. And that's why I say it's infinitely better than 0. You don't have to do it all at once. And every mountain begins with the first step. Perhaps a difficult truth to confront, and one that I face often, is just that you got to do things that are uncomfortable. I think if we're being real with ourselves, if I'm being real with myself at least, a lot of the time is I know I should do a thing, but it's unfamiliar territory. I don't know what that looks like for me. I don't know how to do that, and I may stumble on my first try. I may, it may be awkward on my first try. Awkward's good. Stumbling is fine. And in fact, it's the challenge. The challenge itself is an important part of the process. If it wasn't hard, then it wouldn't be worth doing. And often what it really comes down to is whether I'm willing to set my foot to the trail and start climbing. It's, am I willing to just go for it? Just take that first step. It may look weird to me. It may look weird to other people. But the only way to start refining it is to start doing it. You can't perfect something you haven't started on. So now my question is for you. What about you? What's that thing that you keep dreaming that you'll start on? What's that long-held belief that you've theorized on for years but haven't done anything with? What are those values you claim to believe? I challenge you to lay down your excuses. They will only hinder you. Come to God without excuse or complaint and ask for His help. Perhaps He will show you a way you haven't considered. Perhaps He will show you how to shift your paradigm. Perhaps He will show you where to really focus your next steps. He cares about you. He cares about us. He cares about me. He cares about our lives. And He wants us to live happily, and He knows what that looks like for us. And oftentimes the things that will lead to the most happiness are difficult. They're challenging. They're a trial at first. But they're so very important. Something being uncomfortable is not an indication that it is wrong, is not an indication that you can't do it. It's just an indication that that's where the next step is. And I want to let you know that I believe that. I believe that. So conquer the action gap, cross that boundary, and find the happiness on the other end.